Hi, welcome to this RealFlow particle morphing tutorial. Now before we get started in RealFlow, I'd just like to show you what it is we're going to be creating. So I'm going to flick open here to an application where I have some raw frames that I generated from the project file. So if I hit play, you can see what we're going to be doing. Now this is playing back in slow motion. That'll give you an idea of what it is we're trying to create. So we're going to have, in this case, some text morph up from a ground plane, or what would look like a pool of water when we rendered it out. And we'll have that get to a point and then morph into some other text. And then finally it will fall down towards the floor. So in this scene we'll be dealing with a couple of objects that in this case have been imported from Maya, but could have been imported from any software. We'll be dealing with several different types of RealFlow emitter and several different types of RealFlow daemon to get the effects that we're looking for. Now this is quite simple to put together, and we're going to take you through the whole process here. Before we get started, we'll need to drop into RealFlow and start a new project, because RealFlow won't actually let you do anything with no project file. So I will just call this morph. Okay, there we go, and this is a standard RealFlow 5 setup. If you are trying to follow along on RealFlow 4, you shouldn't have too many problems. And the first thing we need to do is we need to import the objects we're going to be using. In this case it's text, but you could use pretty much anything you liked from say a complicated scene with a car. You could morph that into another car, a house, a robot. It really doesn't matter, but please bear in mind that the more complicated your objects get, the more geometry they have, the longer it will take to simulate in RealFlow. So this is why in this case we're just going to use a couple of very simple objects that I'll import now. So I have my objects already made, and I'll just import the other one. Now all these objects they're just text that's been made in Maya with the Maya Make Text tool, and you can make this in anything, by the way, any 3D program. The only important thing to note is your geometry has to be triangulated before you import it into RealFlow. Right, so let's get these objects into position. Now, if you've never used RealFlow before, to navigate around the viewport, you just need to hit alternate and the left mouse button to rotate around, alternate middle mouse button to move, and alternate right mouse button to zoom. The mouse wheel also zooms. If you've used Maya before, this will be very familiar to you. It's the same in Maya. It's the same for moving objects around. W will move the object, E will rotate the object, and R will scale the object. If you've used Maya again, it'll be very familiar to you, as it's the same hotkeys. Q to go into object selection mode, and these are all up here as well. Object select, move, rotate, and scale. Okay, so moving swiftly along, we're just going to move these into position. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees, stand it up, and then I'm going to rotate it 180 to flip it round. I'm going to do the same with this. 90 and 180. Okay, move the viewport a little bit. So now we have this, and as you can see, this is not particularly well put together geometry, but in this case it really doesn't matter. It's not going to appear in our final animation. It is just a template for the particles to stick to. So I would like to make this Maya text about the same size as this, about the same width as this simply text. So I'm going to move the Maya down here, and if you'll notice, if we hit R, or the scale tool up here, there's no universal scale manipulator in RealFlow 5. There was in RealFlow 4, but for some reason they've left it out of 5. It's quite easy to overcome this, however. You just select your object, and under node parameters you'll see scale. We'll scale this to around 1.2. And I'm actually going to leave this because I want the width to remain the same. So W again to move that into position, and there we go. Now when we morph between the two, we'll get a nice morph that's not too jarring. So this is our basic setup of our objects in, and I'll say again, you don't have to use text, you can use any object you like. And if you remember from the animation that we have the simply rising out of the ground, the simply text. So I'm just going to lower this a little bit. Okay, and the first thing we need to do is basically we need some water on the floor that will morph in to the first word. So to do that we'll need a real flow emitter, and these can be found here. In this case I'm going to use a square emitter, which is currently pointing downwards, no good. So again I will rotate this under node parameters. I will rotate this 180 degrees and flip it the right way up. I'll also need to scale it. Now, for this particular effect, I'm going to want the simply text to come up through a body of static water. And if I hit simulate at the moment, you'll see the water shoot straight up in the air, and also in a very small layout. This is not what I'm looking for. So first things, I'll scale this. So I'll go into a top view, press 1 on the keyboard, zoom out a little bit, and press R to scale. And I'll just get this approximately the size I want it. There we go. Okay, press 4 on the keyboard to go back to perspective view. And what I want to do is I want to fill this surface with water. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make sure it's selected. And under the square, which this is a square emitter, I'm going to set the volume to, let's just say 1 for now. And as you can see, I've filled the volume with all of these particles. The problem is that the more particles you have in RealFlow, the longer it's going to take to simulate. And at the minute, I have 5 million, which this would take us weeks to simulate, probably on our standard sort of system. So I'm going to bump this down to 20,000 particles. Okay, I'm going to hit reset to regenerate this. And now I have 20,000 particles, but they're all stuck over here. So if I drop the volume down to say 0.2, try that. Whoops. Try 0.15. There we go, and now I've got a nice even spread of particles over a surface. Now, if I simulate, you'll see here that nothing will really happen. This will just kind of sit here in a pool. This is because RealFlow particles are controlled by RealFlow daemons, and we have none in this particular scene. I'll just give you a quick example. If we were to drop in, let's say, some gravity here, and I hit simulate, now this water will fall downwards. There we go. And you'll see the simulation slow down as it makes contact with an object. Obviously it's a lot more complex to work out than just this water falling straight down. You'll see it speed up again. There we go. It still has some particle interaction here. Anyway, so as you can see, particles controlled by daemons. Pretty basic concept of RealFlow. So what I want though is for this simply to rise out of this pool of water. So if I start with it approximately underneath the water, and I add a position key on frame 0, which we can do by selecting the object, going up to its node parameters. Under position, we can hit position, add key, or here you can do the same thing, position key. Okay, and I want this by about frame 100 to be on top of this, so, or at the same position as the mire. So what we'll do is we'll scrub through the timeline to frame 100. We'll just select W to move this, move it up so it's in position, and again, position, position key. When I scrub back through the timeline, you'll see that it moves. Okay, so now, if we were to reset this simulation to get our particles back, and then simulate, you can just press A on the keyboard. You'll see that this simply rises through this pool of water. But it's not really the effect we're looking for. It's not impressive at all, really. And why this is because in order for these particles to morph into this lettering, we need to use, again, a RealFlow daemon. So I'll reset this and drop in what's called the magic daemon in RealFlow. Now, for this, we're going to select the object. So make sure you've selected the magic. Under the node parameters, you want object, simply, which is this object here. And the approach strength is the strength, of course, to which the particles will approach the object, and the escape strength is the strength at which they'll break away from the object and become free-floating particles again. Now, before we do any simulations with this, I'll just show you. Now we're actually morphing. This takes quite a long time. It's fairly fast if you're producing a final result. I think the final result you saw when we started this tutorial took about 20 minutes to simulate on a quad-processed machine. But just for testing purposes, what we can do is select our square emitter, our liquid, go up to its node parameters. Under its node you'll see particles. The type is obviously liquid because we're doing a liquid simulation. But what we'll want to do is set the interpolation to local. You need to do this before you change the number of particles, and then we'll set the resolution of this, which in RealFlow is basically the number of particles you're going to be using, to 0.1 instead of 1. And now reset to regenerate these particles, and I have far fewer particles, but I do have enough to give me an overview of what's going to be happening, and you'll see when I simulate now, it's a lot quicker. Now, I'll just let this simulate a few frames so you can see what's going to happen. And you can kind of see the water trying to follow this up. And there we go. But what's happening here is this is not approaching our target object fast enough, because I'd like it to already be nearly formed when it reaches frame 100, or when the simply text has reached its final destination. Another thing is that at the moment as well, this is also simulating slower because our water is interacting with this object, which we really don't want. We're only using this object as a template for where the particles should end up. So what I'll do is I'll select the object. Under its node parameters, I will hit Simulation Inactive. This will turn it off. So now it won't interact with the particles. It'll still be used as a template shape, but it won't anymore have an interaction. So you reset the simulation. You can either reset here or press Ctrl A. And I'll just select the particles so you can get a better look. And now when we simulate, you'll see it's a lot faster. Okay, it slows down again because as soon as it hits this mire, which is still active, the particles again start to interact with the object, and it's a little too slow. So we'll just turn this one off as well. Simulation inactive, and under its display properties, I'm just going to turn it invisible so I don't have to see it at all. Now, reset again, simulate. You'll see this is actually quite quick. Okay, now what we've got here is it's not forming fast enough. You know, if we were to give this more frames, in fact I'll just do that now so you can get a better look, and simulate, you'll see that it will eventually morph into simply, but it's a little slow, and you know, we're up to 400 frames now, which is, again, probably you don't want a 15-minute animation of your morph. You probably more want a 5 or 6 second animation of your morph. So if I select our particles, and what I want to do is speed up this morph, so I'll select magic, and what I'll do is I'll rename this into simply morph. So I know what it is, because we're going to use a couple of these morph and magic demons, as well as a couple more emitters to get the drips and to simulate various other effects. So naming things is never a bad idea. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to set the approach strength to maybe 18, and the escape strength to 20. Now, if I set the escape strength lower, some of the particles will approach at such a speed that they will actually go too fast, overshoot, fly off into the distance, and this is not the effect we're looking for. Now, the magic mode should be nearest face, and random within face no. If you don't change this, what will happen is all the particles will clump to random faces within the object, and then they'll start moving around the object, and it will give you a crawly effect, which, you know, can be useful in certain scenarios, but for a good liquid morph, I find these settings work better. So again, we'll simulate, and now you can see it approaches much faster. Okay, so now you can start to see here that the morph is happening much faster. Before we were up to frame 400 and we hadn't even got the basic outline yet. Now we're on frame 180, 190, 200 and basically we have the full letter generated. But if we scrub back through the timeline, what happened was this is supposed to look like it's rising out of the water, and it does not. The water actually goes downwards to meet it because it's approaching at high speed, and then it kind of just wobbles around all over the place until it finally settles down. And the effect I'm looking for is more like water, like the initial object, bursting through the water. So to achieve this, we know we want a faster approach speed. If we have that, it kind of approaches too fast. So we're going to put an animation key on the actual approach speed itself. So we select our Simply Morph daemon, and the approach speed we'll set to 1. Escape back to 10, which is actually the default values for this. I'll add a key, so just right click, add key, escape strength, add key, and then by frame, let's see, it hits the top at about 100, so by frame 100 and yeah, let's just go for frame 100, see how that looks. So by frame 100 we'll have the approach strength at 18 and the escape speed at 20, and you have to rekey, it doesn't auto key, so key, and we'll just reset and resimulate. Okay, we still have the problem of it going beneath this, which really I don't want. So what I'm going to do to try and combat this is to actually skew these keys. So if we go back to the Simply Morph and I hit double click the approach strength, you'll see the fairly linear from 0 to 100. This goes from if you just select the key, you'll see this goes from 1 to 18, where we set it in a very linear manner. So if I click here, I can now adjust this so it's less linear. There we go. So this will actually morph quite slowly until it reaches frame 25, when it will start to pick up speed. Let's just give that a little more like so, and this should give it enough time to actually rise out of the water before the particles start approaching at a faster speed. So we'll close down the curve editor, reset, and resimulate. Okay, now you can see we have a little bit under, but that's fine. It's kind of the effect I'm looking for. Right, now I'll let this simulate. What I'm looking for is, I quite like the way when it hits the top it'll crash up in the air and then back downwards. I'll play this simulation again in a second so you can see it better. So I'll stop it around 240, and if I set this to 240, this will actually set our playback to 240, so when we play back it won't continue frames we haven't generated. And I'm going to actually select the Simply object and make it invisible as well, because we don't need it anymore. And when I hit play, you should see these particles do what we wanted them to. Okay, it's a little bit fast because it plays as fast as it can, but that is the basic first morph that we have in place. Okay, and we know this morph will be finished by, let's say, frame 230. So, what we need to do now is take this text and get it to drip water, because one of the nice things about this simulation is the fact that as the object rises out the floor, it starts to drip liquid. So it looks like water is actually dripping off the particles that are there. It's not, it's actually coming from a separate emitter. So we will take you through that process in the next part. See you in a while.